Asterisk, 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 asterisk. I stood in my parents' living room, watching my younger sister Sarah pose for what felt like the 100th graduation photo. The golden afternoon light streamed through our bay windows, casting everything in that warm, celebratory glow that made perfect moments feel even more perfect. Mom bustled around with her camera. Dad beamed with pride, and relatives kept praising our family's golden girl who had just graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Law School. But as I watched this picture-perfect scene unfold, I could not help but think about how different this moment would have been just 2 years ago, when these same people laughed at my dreams. Before I tell you how I turned their laughter into silence, drop a comment below and let me know where you are watching from. Hit that like button if you have ever been the underdog in your family, and do not forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Trust me, what happened next changed everything. Back in 2018, I was 22 years old and fresh out of college with a marketing degree that felt as useful as a paper airplane in a hurricane. While my classmates were scrambling for corporate internships and entry-level positions with health benefits, I had a different vision. I wanted to build something of my own, something that would give me the freedom to work from anywhere and be my own boss. That something was dropshipping, and I was absolutely convinced it was going to be my ticket to financial independence. I remember the exact moment I decided to take the plunge. It was a Tuesday evening in November, and I was sitting in my tiny studio apartment scrolling through success stories of 20-something entrepreneurs who had built six-figure businesses from their laptops. The more I read, the more convinced I became that this was my path. I spent the next 3 weeks researching everything I could about e-commerce product sourcing and digital marketing. I watched countless YouTube tutorials, read every blog post I could find, and even bought a couple of online courses with money I had saved from my part-time job at a local electronics store. My parents, David and Linda, had very different reactions to my announcement. Dad, who had spent 30 years as a construction engineer climbing the corporate ladder, could not understand why I would want to give up the security of a traditional career path. During one particularly tense dinner conversation, he leaned back in his chair and said, "Son, you need a real job with benefits. This internet stuff is not going to pay your bills or build you a retirement fund." His voice carried that tone of paternal concern mixed with disappointment that I had heard so many times growing up whenever I strayed from his idea of the right path. Mom was even more direct about her concerns. As a registered nurse who had worked double shifts to help put both Sarah and me through college, she believed deeply in the value of stable employment and steady paychecks. "Ahmad, you need to stop playing games and be responsible like your sister," she would say, gesturing toward Sarah's room where my younger sister was busy studying for her LSAT prep courses. Sarah was everything my parents had hoped for in a child. She was 20 years old, maintained a perfect 4.0 GPA in her pre-law program at a prestigious university, and had already secured internships at 2 different law firms. The comparison started almost immediately and cut deeper than I expected. "Why cannot you be more like Sarah?" became a regular refrain at family dinners. "She has her whole future mapped out, and you are chasing pipe dreams." Every achievement Sarah earned became an implicit criticism of my choices. When she made the dean's list, I heard about it. When she got accepted into an exclusive study abroad program, I heard about that too. It was not that my parents were trying to be cruel, but their disappointment in my unconventional path was impossible to miss. Despite the lack of support at home, I pressed forward with my plan. I used my savings to set up my first online store focusing on fitness products because I figured health and wellness would always be in demand. I spent hours every day learning about Facebook ads, Instagram marketing, and search engine optimization. The learning curve was steeper than I had anticipated, and the first few months were a humbling experience that tested every ounce of determination I had. January through March of 2019 were some of the most challenging months of my life. My total sales for those 3 months combined were $847, and after accounting for product costs, advertising, spend, and platform fees, my actual profit was only $127. I was burning through my savings faster than I was making money, and I could feel the weight of my parents' skepticism growing heavier with each passing week. By April of 2019, my financial situation had gone from challenging to genuinely scary. I was consistently losing money every month, and my carefully saved nest egg from 2 years of part-time work was disappearing at an alarming rate. Between March and August, I lost $3,200 of my own money trying to make the business work. Product returns, failed advertising campaigns, and inventory mistakes were eating away at everything I had worked for, and I was starting to understand why my parents had been so concerned about my choice to forego traditional employment. The worst part was not the money I was losing, but the mounting pressure I felt every time I had to ask my parents for help with basic living expenses. When I could no longer afford my studio apartment rent, I had to swallow my pride and ask Dad if he could cover me for a couple of months while I figured things out. The conversation was every bit as uncomfortable as I had feared it would be. Dad did not say no, but he did not hide his frustration either. "I told you so, Ahmad. This internet nonsense will not pay bills. You need to face reality and start looking for a real job before you dig yourself into a deeper hole." Mom's reaction was somehow even more painful because it was wrapped in genuine worry rather than anger. She started mentioning me to her coworkers and neighbors, and I could tell from her carefully chosen words that those conversations were not going well. "People keep asking me what you are doing with your life," she confided one evening while we were doing dishes together. "I do not know what to tell them anymore. They see Sarah succeeding and wonder why we have one child who is thriving and another who is struggling." The comparison to Sarah became an almost daily reminder of how far I had fallen short of my family's expectations. While I was hemorrhaging money on failed product launches and ineffective marketing campaigns, Sarah was collecting achievement after achievement. In the spring of 2019, she received a prestigious internship offer from one of the top law firms in our city, complete with a stipend that was more than I had made in my entire 6 months of trying to run an online business. The pride in my parents' voices when they talked about her accomplishments was unmistakable, and the contrast with their worried whispers about my situation could not have been starker. Family dinners became exercises in endurance, as conversations inevitably centered around Sarah's latest successes while I tried to make myself invisible. "Our Sarah is really going places," Dad would say to visiting relatives, his chest puffed out with pride. "She has got job offers lined up already, and she has not even graduated yet." Meanwhile, I would sit quietly picking at my food and hoping no one would ask me any direct questions about what I was doing with my life. The psychological weight of constantly feeling like the family disappointment was heavier than any financial stress I was experiencing. I started avoiding social gatherings and making excuses to skip family events because I could not bear to face another round of well-meaning questions about my future plans. My college friends were all settling into their careers, posting LinkedIn updates about promotions and work achievements, while I was hiding in my childhood bedroom, trying to figure out how to salvage a business that seemed determined to fail. By September 2019, I had hit what felt like rock bottom. My credit card debt had climbed to $5,600, and I had exhausted all of my savings trying to keep the business afloat. The final blow came when I had to move back into my parents' house because I could no longer afford even the cheapest apartment in town. The night I carried my boxes back into my teenage bedroom was one of the lowest points of my entire life. The breaking point came during Thanksgiving weekend of 2019, a moment that is still burned into my memory with painful clarity. Our extended family had gathered for the holiday, and the house was full of aunts, uncles, cousins, and grandparents who had not seen me in several months. The inevitable questions about my life and career started almost immediately, and I could see my parents struggling with how to explain my situation without causing embarrassment for anyone involved. My Uncle Robert, who had always been the successful entrepreneur in our family with his own accounting firm, pulled me aside during the pre-dinner socializing and asked how my business was going. Before I could formulate an answer, Dad jumped in with an explanation that made my stomach drop. "Ahmad is still figuring things out," he said, with a forced smile and a tone that suggested he was choosing his words very carefully. "You know how it is with young people these days. They want to try everything before they settle down into something stable." The embarrassment in my father's voice was unmistakable, and I could feel my face burning with shame as Uncle Robert nodded knowingly and quickly changed the subject to something safer. But the humiliation of that moment was nothing compared to what happened next. Sarah chose that exact moment to make her big announcement about being accepted into Harvard Law School with a partial scholarship news that sent the entire gathering into celebration mode. The next hour was a blur of congratulations, phone calls to distant relatives, and endless discussions about Sarah's bright future in corporate law. She handled the attention with the grace and confidence that had always made her the star of every family gathering, while I retreated to a corner and tried to become invisible. Watching my little sister bask in the genuine pride and excitement of our entire extended family while I sat there as the cautionary tale was more painful than any financial loss I had experienced in my failed business ventures. The conversation that broke my heart completely happened later that evening when I was helping clean up in the kitchen. Mom and my Aunt Patricia were talking in low voices while putting away leftovers, and they had forgotten I was still in the adjoining pantry organizing dishes. "I just do not know where we went wrong with Ahmad," I heard Mom say with a sigh that carried months of accumulated worry. "We raised both kids the same way, gave them the same opportunities and support, but somehow Sarah turned out perfect, and Ahmad is just lost. I keep waiting for him to grow up and take responsibility for his life." Standing there in the dark pantry listening to my mother question where she had failed as a parent because of my choices was the moment I realized I had two options. I could either give up completely and spend the rest of my life proving her fears right, or I could find a way to turn this devastating low point into the foundation for something better. That night alone in my childhood bedroom, while the rest of the house slept off their Thanksgiving feast, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of wallowing in self-pity or giving in to the depression that had been threatening to overwhelm me for months, I chose to fight back. I spent the remaining weeks of 2019 completely immersed in research, studying every aspect of e-commerce with the intensity of someone whose life depended on it. I analyzed successful stores, dissected viral marketing campaigns, and studied consumer behavior patterns until my eyes burned from staring at my laptop screen. During this deep dive into market research, I discovered a trend that would become the foundation of my eventual success: sustainable and eco-friendly phone accessories. The environmental consciousness movement was gaining serious momentum, and consumers were actively seeking alternatives to traditional plastic products. I found a supplier who specialized in bamboo phone cases and other eco-friendly mobile accessories, and something about this niche felt different from all my previous failed attempts. With the $800 I had left in my checking account, I placed my biggest order yet and prepared to launch what I had decided would be my final attempt at making e-commerce work. If this failed, I would accept defeat, find a traditional job, and spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been. But deep in my gut, I had a feeling this time was going to be different. January 2020 started exactly the way I had hoped it would. My first bamboo phone case design went viral within 2 weeks of launching, driven by a perfectly timed Instagram post that caught the attention of several environmental influencers. The sales numbers I had been dreaming about for over a year suddenly became reality almost overnight. My first month revenue hit $15,000 with a profit margin of $4,500, after all expenses were accounted for. The success felt surreal after so many months of failure, and I was almost afraid to believe it was real. I had learned to be cautious about getting too excited over good news, because I had experienced too many false starts and temporary victories that quickly turned into disappointments. So instead of announcing my breakthrough to my family, I decided to keep quiet and see if I could sustain the momentum before making any bold claims about my business success. February brought even better results as word of mouth and social media sharing drove my revenue up to $28,000. By March, I was consistently hitting $45,000 in monthly sales, and my profit margins were improving as I gained experience with inventory management and customer acquisition costs. The financial stress that had dominated my life for the previous year was rapidly disappearing, replaced by the intoxicating feeling of building something that actually worked. The second quarter of 2020 became a period of explosive growth that exceeded my wildest expectations. The combination of increased environmental awareness and people spending more time shopping online during the pandemic created perfect conditions for my business to thrive. My monthly revenue consistently stayed above $80,000, and I was finally making the kind of money I had dreamed about when I first started my entrepreneurial journey. By December 2020, I had generated $1.2 million in total revenue, with a net profit of $350,000 after all business expenses, taxes, and reinvestment costs were accounted for. The numbers were so far beyond what I had originally hoped for that I sometimes had to look at my bank statements multiple times to convince myself they were accurate. I had gone from living in my parents' basement with maxed out credit cards to having more money in savings than most people my age could imagine. Despite my newfound financial success, I kept a relatively low profile around my family and friends. I quietly moved into my own apartment, bought a reliable car, and paid off all of my debts, but I did not make a big show of these improvements in my circumstances. Part of me was still processing the dramatic change in my situation, and another part was waiting for the right moment to reveal the extent of my success to the people who had doubted me for so long. That moment came in May 2021 at Sarah's graduation party, celebrating her completion of Harvard Law School. The same extended family members who had witnessed my humiliation 18 months earlier were gathered again this time to celebrate my sister's latest achievement. Sarah had graduated in the top 10% of her class and already had multiple job offers from prestigious law firms across the country. She was once again the golden child whose success made everyone proud to be part of our family. I arrived at the party driving my brand new Tesla Model 3, a purchase I had made the week before specifically for this occasion. The car represented everything I had worked for and achieved, but more importantly, it was impossible to ignore or explain away as a lucky break or temporary windfall. As I pulled into my parents' driveway, I could see Dad looking out the front window with a confused expression that told me he was trying to figure out how I could afford such an expensive vehicle. The question I had been waiting for finally came about an hour into the party when Dad pulled me aside and asked directly, "Ahmad, how did you afford that car? Please tell me you did not do something foolish like take out a huge loan you cannot pay back." His concern was genuine, and I could tell he was worried that I had made another impulsive decision that would lead to more financial problems down the road. I looked around the room at my family members, the same people who had watched me fail so spectacularly just a few years before, and I realized this was the moment I had been unconsciously preparing for since that devastating Thanksgiving conversation. With a calm voice that surprised even me, I said I bought it with cash from my online business. I made $1.2 million in revenue last year, and I have been profitable for the past 18 months. The silence that followed my announcement was unlike anything I had ever experienced. My usually chatty extended family stopped mid-conversation and stared at me as if I had just announced I was moving to Mars. Sarah, who had been holding court in the center of the room describing her job prospects, went completely quiet for what might have been the first time in her life. Even Uncle Robert, who I had always considered successful with his accounting firm, looked genuinely impressed by the numbers I had shared. In the days and weeks that followed Sarah's graduation party, something fundamental shifted in my family's dynamics. The respect I had been craving for years finally materialized, but it came with a mixture of emotions I had not anticipated. My parents went from viewing me as their disappointing son to treating me like someone whose opinion mattered and whose choices deserved consideration rather than criticism. Dad, who had spent years encouraging me to find a traditional job with benefits, started asking detailed questions about my business model and marketing strategies. His engineering mind was fascinated by the logistics of e-commerce, and I could see him beginning to understand that what I had built was not just a lucky streak or a hobby that got out of hand, but a legitimate business that required real skills and knowledge to operate successfully. Mom's transformation was even more dramatic. The worry and disappointment that had colored every conversation about my future for the past 3 years disappeared, completely replaced by curiosity about my work and pride in what I had accomplished. She started mentioning my success to her coworkers and neighbors, the same people she had once struggled to give updates about my life, and I could hear the genuine excitement in her voice when she talked about my achievements. Sarah's reaction surprised me the most, because it was completely free of the competitiveness or resentment I might have expected. Instead, she seemed genuinely proud of what I had built and impressed by my persistence through the difficult early years. During a private conversation we had a few days after her party, she apologized for not being more supportive during my struggles and admitted that she had underestimated both my business acumen and my determination to succeed on my own terms. The validation felt good, better than I had imagined it would during all those months when I was dreaming of proving my doubters wrong. But as the initial excitement of my reveal wore off, I realized that the most important victory was not changing their minds about my potential, but discovering that I had never actually needed their approval to succeed. The business I had built was not motivated by spite or a desire to prove anyone wrong, but by my own vision of what I wanted my life to look like. Looking back on that journey from failure to success, I understand now that the doubts and criticism from my family, while painful at the time, actually served as motivation that pushed me to work harder and think more creatively about solutions to my problems. The low points, especially that devastating Thanksgiving conversation, forced me to confront the gap between my aspirations and my results, which ultimately led me to the focused research and strategic thinking that made my breakthrough possible. The money was life-changing, but the confidence I gained from building something valuable from nothing was even more important. I learned that success is not about proving other people wrong about your potential, but about proving to yourself that you can overcome obstacles and create something meaningful even when the odds seem stacked against you. The external validation was nice, but the internal satisfaction of knowing I had trusted my instincts and persevered through genuine hardship was what really mattered. Today, my relationship with my family is stronger than it has ever been, built on mutual respect, rather than the one-sided expectations that had defined our interactions for so many years. Sarah and I have become genuine friends and collaborators, often discussing our respective career paths and sharing advice about professional challenges. My parents have become some of my biggest supporters, and Dad even invested in a small side business I launched recently, using the systems and knowledge I gained from my e-commerce success. The noise of doubt can be incredibly loud when it comes from people you love and respect, but I learned that the quiet whisper of self-belief, if you listen closely enough and nurture it carefully, will always guide you toward your true potential. Sometimes the greatest victory is not changing other people's minds about what you can achieve, but discovering that you never needed their permission to pursue your dreams in the first place. What challenges have you faced when following your own path instead of the one others expected you to take? Drop a comment below and share your story. If this resonated with you, give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button for more real stories about overcoming doubt and finding success on your own terms. Share this with someone who needs to hear that their dreams are worth fighting for even when nobody else believes in them yet. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember that your biggest breakthrough might be just one more attempt away from becoming your reality.